So I have known Grant since he was an undergraduate at the University of Texas in Austin. I first met him, do you remember when we first met?
I think at an ASL meeting.
It was at the ASL meeting in Carnegie Mellon.
That's right.
Yeah. So he was came to an ASL meeting in Carnegie Mellon. So while in Texas, he was very influenced by Bob Boyer and Jay's brother Moore. Let me think. From there, you went to Amsterdam. Yeah, and then from there to Edinburgh, where you did your dissertation under Paul Jackson, doing decision procedures, efficient decision procedures for real closed fields and real algebraic computation. And then, help me out, Brent. From there, it was
we had a postdoc.
The postdoc in Cambridge with Mike Paulson and Edinburgh. There was a visit. There was an internship at Microsoft with Leo. There was a visit to Carnegie Mellon. But a lot of us, so Grant is, really enthusiastic. Now, a lot of us are enthusiastic about what we do. We love logic, we love formal methods, and that's why we became academics, right? We wanted to work on we wanted the freedom to work on the kinds of projects that interest us and do what we want to do. Grant wanted the same thing. He came up with a different solution. He decided that the best way to achieve his goal was to found a company, incorporate, raise venture capital, hire a lot of really smart people, and then do the kind of stuff that he wanted to do all along. So he's managed. So he's as you'll see, he's done a tremendous amount to really make formal methods a public commodity, and miraculously at the same time, he's still doing really cool research. So we've got a lot to learn from him.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, thank you for the introduction and the invitation. And let me just say what an honor it is for me to be here among so many of my heroes and teachers and colleagues and maybe future colleagues at Aesthetic Integration, I hope, etc. And I think what a unique opportunity we have here for cross-pollination. So I'm just learning so much with so many different point of views. And it's a very unique thing that the organizers have made possible for all of us. So I'm very grateful. By the way, can you hear me through this microphone? Okay, excellent. So this is going to be a bit of a different kind of talk in that, I had to think sort of long and hard about what I wanted to present to all of you and what would be most useful. And I have a number of goals for this talk that I'll sort of enumerate. But fundamentally, what we do at Aesthetic Integration is we have taken formal verification techniques driven by the idea that modern finance, as I'll show you sort of at length, has reached a point such that formal verification is absolutely necessary to properly regulate the algorithms that are running our financial markets. So driven by this idea and co-founded with my best friend from undergrad, who was formerly the head of what's called the Central Risk Trading Desk at Deutsche Bank, Dennis Ignatovich, we set out a little more than 3 years ago, so fresh off postdoc with Paul and Larry and working with Leo and Jeremy, to go and first found a company, as Jeremy said, raise capital, which is a whole other thing we could speak about at length, and build tools to actually be able to analyze financial algorithms for regulatory properties, and in the process, work towards getting these techniques embedded in regulation, just as analogous techniques are now, for instance, a part of regulation in avionics. So one of the things we've learned in the process is how difficult it can be to sell formal verification, even if we have highly automated techniques. And I'll show you, we have done a lot of work with decision procedures tailored to financial algorithms and the types of regulatory questions we're interested in, to make this stuff very automatic. But still, even getting the ideas across can take a lot of effort, let's say. And we found it's been very important to have very crisp metaphors and succinct graphics and visuals. So what I want to do is actually start with a 2-minute video that we developed to try to sell the big picture. And this has been really helpful for us. But I spend most of my time giving talks to people who have never heard of formal verification. And so you'll see this is the point of view that this video takes, and then we'll dive into the details.
What's plaguing today's electronic financial markets? The world economy is built on a staggeringly complex tangle of algorithms. competitive pressures and economic recession have contributed to increasingly opaque and unstable markets. The effects of glitches and unfair advantages can be devastating, cratering the confidence of investors and ultimately hurting the general public. Regulators and the industry have worked tirelessly to define what safe and fair markets are. What's been missing is a way to analyze and regulate all of the algorithms underlying them. The solution is formal verification, the science of correct algorithms. Other safety-critical industries already rely on formal verification to make their algorithms safe. Imandra, by aesthetic integration, is the world's first formal verification solution for financial markets. Consider the building of a bridge. A design flaw may be catastrophic. To make it safe, engineers use powerful computer-aided design tools which analyze designs for safety automatically. Powered by latest advances in artificial intelligence, computer science, and mathematics, Imandra brings unprecedented rigor to the electronic financial markets, analyzing the safety and fairness of algorithms before they're deployed. Financial algorithms are unfathomably complex. They can be in a virtually infinite number of possible states. Examining 100, 1,000, or even 100,000 test cases isn't enough. We must consider every possible case to answer definitively. What can possibly go wrong? Imandra allows designers and regulators to fix breaches of safety and fairness before they affect markets. Let's build safer, more reliable, and regulatory compliant systems that all of us can trust, saving everyone time and money. Imandra, by aesthetic integration, the logic of financial risk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So, this is the problem, right? And I think we're all very familiar with it, at least in the abstract. And that is, financial markets have become notoriously unstable. There's many different kinds of instability in this case. So, for instance, flash crashes. Probably everyone in this room heard news of a giant flash crash in equities in May of 2010, for instance. So these are typically systemic events characterized by non-trivial codependence of different trading algorithms, reliance on very complex what are called order types, which is something we'll cover at length, and has led to drops in markets of trillions of dollars. So there are very large public flash crashes that we hear about from time to time in the news, but really modern markets have become so fragmented and the discrete structure of how the different trading venues work so complex that minor flash crashes are extremely common, happen regularly, and practitioners are constantly trying to find ways to actually mitigate those risks. Another major issue is lack of transparency. So, I mean, to me, it's utterly amazing the context we've been given as formal verification practitioners for being able to apply our work to financial markets, because this is an industry that now for over a decade, by law, has been required to actually supply to regulators and to the public precise specifications of how their algorithms work. So, for instance, an exchange like New York Stock Exchange has to provide something called exchange bylaws, which describe the precise mechanics of their different order types. And I'll talk to you at length about what these are and what these kinds of specifications look like. The fundamental issue, however, is regulators, those involved actually in designing and enforcing the regulations, and financial practitioners, they haven't had the right tools, in particular our tools, to actually describe in the right way how these algorithms work. So if you look at a typical exchange bylaw, this may be a 500-page PDF document that is in a mixture of prose and tables and maybe 25 or 50 concrete examples of specific behaviors on an exchange, on an order book. It's trying to communicate a very complex algorithm, but it's of course doing it in an ambiguous, imprecise, directly machine analyzable way. And that leads to all sorts of issues, not only with correctness, but also around fairness. So for instance, imagine you are given an exchange bylaw or the description of how order types work inside of a dark pool, which is like an exchange but inside of a bank, and you read something in the documentation that doesn't quite make sense, and you have a friend who happens to work at that venue, so you can call them up and ask for clarification about some ambiguous bit of their spec. But all of a sudden, now we have asymmetry of information in the markets. And you know more about how trading on that venue works than someone else, and that's unfair. So there's all sorts of regulations around fairness in this way, where the actual mechanics of these different systems must be transparent, and all market participants must, by law, have the same access to how those things work. Also, just the uniform title of glitches, which you hear about all the time: NASDAQ glitches, BATS, NYSE, LSE, etc. So these are, basically any sort of bug you can imagine that ranges from Goldman Sachs Alphabet trading glitch, Knight Capital, BATS failing trading its own IPO. But of course, when the stakes are this high, these losses can be tremendous. So one of our messages and really real beliefs in what we're doing, that drives what we're doing, is this idea that actually financial markets are safety critical. National economies rely upon them, and we need to treat them both in development, in compliance and regulation, in ways like we treat things like avionics, collision avoidance algorithms, air traffic control, and so on. So I have a number of goals for this talk, and sorry that maybe that color is not so readable. Can you read it? No. Oh. So, okay, luckily my titles are not that great. I have two meta goals, I would say. So the first goal is just to convince you that what we do is necessary for financial markets. That's number one. And I want to do that by illustrating effectively how complex these systems really are. And I'll introduce something we call the stack of financial algorithms, which is a way of giving a structure to algorithms involved in finance that we rely upon in our verification endeavors. So that's number one. Number two, we want formal verification of financial algorithms to become a mainstream topic for formal verification, just as hardware verification from microprocessor designs, or now formal verification for safety of autonomous vehicles, formalized mathematics in general. We want formal verification, formal analysis of actual fairness, properties, and safety of this infrastructure to be something that we all participate in, because it's really only with this groundswell of interest, I think, in work and advances that we're going to be able to get this stuff into policy. And this just has to happen. It's been the Wild West for too long, and we need rigor in the process. So to do that, I really want to take this time to teach you how we view the financial markets and how we can develop strong analogies and intuitions that are driven by other more familiar verification endeavors like hardware verification. So I hope at the end of this talk you understand what a venue is. An exchange and a dark pool, for instance, so those are both examples of venues. Those are systems where trading takes place. But we'll go over exactly, for instance, what they involve, including something called an order book, which is where orders live and are given certain priority and status, and ultimately trades occur, and all sorts of fairness regulations apply there. So orders are packaged with something called an order type. And so how many of you have heard of market orders? Yes. So market orders are the simplest kind of order. You can say something like, I want to buy 50 shares of Microsoft, full stop. You send that out to a venue, and you may be filled, most likely you'll be filled, but you have no protection on price movement. So that will be filled at any price. The next step in complexity, let's say, of an order type is a limit order. With a limit order, you can say, I want to buy 50 shares of Microsoft, but at most $70 a share. So you add in a certain level of protection. But what's happened over the last 15 years or so, we've seen a huge proliferation of different trading venues. So we know the big ones, like New York Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, NASDAQ. But I'll show you, I think on the next slide, the staggering collection that we now have, even in the US. I think last I heard 66 regulated trading venues. And each of these has their own collection of order types. And these order types have become incredibly complex. And I'll walk you through some of those. So matching logic, we'll do a number of things analyzing matching logics in this talk. And the matching logic is the collection of order types and their precise behavior at a trading venue like an exchange. Market microstructure, this is effectively looking at how these different matching logics and trading rules interact, both at a micro and macro level. And a smart order router, which is, as we'll see, a sort of one step up in the stack from trading venues. And that's something that has a lot of regulations and may take a large order, let's say, to buy 1,000 shares, or let's say 10,000 shares of Microsoft, and chunk it up into a bunch of little pieces that it strategically sends to many different venues. And it has to be done in a way that obeys all sorts of regulations. So, okay, so I hope through this talk you'll get an idea for those concepts. I want to convey an idea of the different regulations that surround these things, and then how we can actually encode them precisely and subject things like matching logics to formal regulatory analysis. So I'll talk about regulations around transparency, safety and fairness, in particular something called Reg ATS-N, which is regulation for algorithmic trading in the US, regulation around best execution, which governs things like smart order routers. And these are very dense, publicly available policies and regulations that in many ways are paralleled in both Europe and the US. And we've done a lot of work to actually formalize, work with regulators, work with financial institutions to build libraries of formalized statements derived from these regulations that we can then use to subject these algorithms to actual formal regulatory analysis. And that's something that has to be community-driven, industry-wide, because we are trying to formalize things that are by, that exist ultimately in law in an informal fashion. And finally, this is probably too ambitious, but I hope that you, at the end of this talk, would be able to write a spec in your system of choice, let's say, of venue matching logic and analyze some basic regulatory properties. So as you'll hopefully see, with the right point of view, these are very penetrable things that we can do with modern tools. So I also hope that you come out of this with some strong intuitions. One that drives a lot of what we do is this view of venue matching logics, so the collection of order types at all of the different trading venues. We really view those as being like an instruction set architecture for the markets. So with this fragmentation of the markets, all of these different venues, these venues compete against each other for order flow. So if you are, for instance, BATS Exchange in Kansas, a very widely used exchange, especially for US equities, you need to incentivize people to trade on your exchange. And it is one of these chicken or the egg things where no one wants to trade on your venue unless a lot of people are trading on your venue, because they want to trade somewhere that has a good likelihood they'll get filled at a good price and filled rapidly and so on. So you have these venues competing against each other, and what they have done is found ways to incentivize people to trade on them. Let's say some high-frequency trading firm or a hedge fund. You get their order flow by effectively saying, let's develop together a special order type that is tailored to the types of trading you like to do. Of course, we'll make this order type available to everyone, and we have to disclose how it works. But perhaps we'll have something that acts like a limit order, but actually has hidden liquidity and only displays to the public that you're going to trade this much, but you really want to trade more. And whenever you reach, let's say, a certain quota, we're going to refill your order, but we have to, by law, change its timestamp. And we may listen to a signal coming from Chicago Mercantile Exchange for corn futures and change your price, blah, blah, blah. So these things have really become little programs. And regulators have been tasked with analyzing them. So whenever a venue operator wants to bring out a new order type, they actually have to disclose it to the regulator. But of course, the regulators, again, haven't had the right tools. They have done this by getting PDF documents written by often very talented lawyers, and then they're, have to try to somehow extract something that they can run simulations on and do some basic analysis. And what ends up happening is order types get approved very often where actually unfair behavior can happen, and then all bets are off. So hopefully you'll agree that there's a pressing need for venues to be bulletproof with respect to safety and fairness regulations, for matching logics to be formally described to regulators and to market participants, for matching logics to be formally analyzed with respect to precise encodings of regulatory directives, And finally, this is something that I'm very excited about, and Larry Paulson and I and a number of others have begun to really think hard about, and that is the development of new financial mathematics that takes the discrete matching logics of actual venues into account. So I'll go into this in more detail, but basically the type of mathematics that regulators typically use to analyze the markets in the large, stochastic calculus and so on, almost always if you pull out a paper, maybe a brilliant paper from a financial economist at a regulatory agency, it will start with something like, we assume all orders are market orders. Because at the base of this stochastic mathematics, they don't have the tools to actually capture the discrete structure of these different little programs, these different order types. But now, something we've done at Aesthetic Integration is build formal models of venues and their matching logics worldwide. And we can now start to build, in a system like Isabelle, for instance, actual financial mathematics that's building on the precise semantics of the order types that you really can only do if you have their formal models. Okay, so what drives a lot of what we do is something we call the stack of financial algorithms, and we will stick very low in the stack. But at the lowest level of this stack of sort of global finance, we have what we've been talking about so far, which are trading venues. Sorry, question? Oh, okay. These are,
maybe one question
yes.
to ask. So, can you say a little bit what an unfair what did you say,
matching
order
logic
type is? Because you could say market is market. I mean, you can do whatever you like, and if somebody buys your stuff, then you are good.
Yes. So market orders, I mean, most exchanges agree on what a market order means. But for instance, something I'll show you in a minute is where a lot of unfairness happens is non-trivial interaction between different order types. So a high-level fairness regulation may be around pricing and priority. So you can have many different kinds of clients trading on an exchange, and it better be the case that the exchange matching logic is not disadvantaging one class of clients over another when it comes to a price. And one of the issues is, for instance, the exchange needs to know at any given time who sent an order, right? The source of an order is something that's fundamentally packaged with an order because the exchange, first of all, needs to communicate with the client. The exchange may need to abide by client-specific risk constraints. So, it could be that BlackRock is not allowed to trade with, X, and that's encoded actually as a constraint. So the order is carrying around information, effectively that can be used to determine where it came from. And a lot of unfairness that, has led to many fines and many issues in the US and in Europe is around dark pools, which are like exchanges, but inside of a bank, they're less transparent. And, it's happened many times that specific preferred clients of the bank have systematically been given better prices than, the Texas Teachers Pension Fund or whatever. And so that's a fundamental thing. Pricing, priority, I'll talk to you about as well. And priority is basically, there should not be a way for you tweaking some combination of order types and parameters. You should not be able to jump the queue ahead of other people who were there before you with a more aggressive price, for instance. So that's the flavor of a lot of these things. Okay.
Ben?
Yes?
You mentioned the discreteness. Do you mean there's some kind of hybrid system going on? So it's a combination between discrete and continuous?
So in modeling venues that I'll show you, everything is discrete, effectively. But as you go to look at the combinations of, in a sort of macrostructure way, look at venues and how they interact in, with each other in the large, and actual trading algorithms that are driven by signals coming from things like, quantitative models with stochastic calculus, then I think hybrid automata, hybrid systems becomes a very natural formalism for that. But we're going to stay very low in the stack where basically everything is discrete, as it really is in implementation, but it's highly nonlinear. So, yes, I want to contrast basically the discreteness down here with the continuity and stochastic nature of higher level trading algorithms, which is what people think of typically when they think of like a trading strategy. That makes sense. Okay, so down here we have the venues. Think of these as sort of the plumbing of the markets. And again, there's huge numbers of these, and each may have its own matching logic, its own order types, and they have to all abide by certain regulations. Then we have smart order routers. Smart order routers, as I mentioned, these typically, you'll see on many of these at a bank, an investment bank, or a trading firm, and they will take large orders that could have a lot of market impact and chunk them up into small pieces strategically and send them out to many different venues. But you have a problem there that you need to properly understand the semantics of the order types at all of those different venues to do this in a fair way and in an efficient way. And the Reg NMS in the US, for instance, requires that this be done in such a way that the client must never be filled at a worse price than if you had just sent the order in bulk to an exchange, to a publicly lit exchange, for instance. And that's a very hard thing to establish, but there are certain statements you can derive from that around what's called best execution that we can actually use to analyze algorithms. So then we have trading algos. So people call these algos. And these are what you probably think of when you think of a trading strategy. You have teams of physicists, quants, inside Goldman Sachs, using some intuition coming from nature, perhaps, to come up with brilliant new ways to win effectively. And as you go up, you then have containers of these things, and you have sort of portfolio solvers in a way. Inventory management, these things get very interesting. Collateral trading, taking all sorts of tax implications into account. But the intuition I want you to have, effectively, is at the lowest level, venues, smart order routers, these things are high frequency. This is happening at unbelievable timescales. And as you go up, it becomes increasingly lower frequency. And likewise, here we have really discrete systems that we can naturally model with our logics we're used to, but they're highly nonlinear. So we really need great nonlinear decision procedures for reasoning over things like real closed fields, for instance, and reasoning about transcendental functions in certain cases. But that's really where things like venues live. And as we go up, it becomes increasingly continuous, nonlinear, and also stochastic. And it's really trading algos and above that what you typically think of as financial mathematics takes place. But of course, that financial mathematics is often completely abstracting away the real discrete complexity of this plumbing. Okay, so what is a venue? Well, we've talked a bit about these, but just to give you an intuition, is there anybody who had heard of all of those? And this is just a tiny portion. It is, an utterly complex, incredible collection of venues that, with new venues coming online regularly. And regulators have to be able to analyze the matching logics and order types at all of those. And then you have, inside of investment banks now, things called dark pools, or ATSs, alternative trading systems. And these are effectively the same sort of software stacks as an exchange, maintaining the same data structures and doing the same sort of things, but they have very different transparency regulations. So an exchange's book, the activity happening on an exchange has to be, it's what's called a lit market. It has to be public. You can't read it. Lit liquidity is what it says on the top, and dark liquidity. So liquidity is just this idea that you have this fluid flowing in exchanges, which are the orders. And so everybody wants liquidity. And lit liquidity are the exchanges and so on, but dark pools can have lots of delays in how they report their information. And why do those exist? Well, first of all, if you're an investment bank and you send an order out to an exchange, you have shown your cards, so to say. You have revealed some of what you're doing, and also you're going to pay transaction fees. So exchanges make a lot of money out of people trading on them and different pricing models that come out of it. Whereas a dark pool, you might be Goldman Sachs, and you might have one trading desk who has a client who wants to buy Microsoft. You have another desk who has a client who wants to sell Microsoft. Well, why not just match them internally in the bank without sending those orders out to the markets and incurring transaction fees and revealing what you're doing? And there's nothing intrinsically unethical about doing trades internally, as long as you make that stuff eventually public. But because of that lack of, let's say, proper regulation around dark pools, a lot of very, very bad things happen. So has anyone read Flash Boys? They say yes. So this is all about dark pools, and particular now IEX, which has become a regulated exchange. It's graduated, so to say, but it began as effectively a dark pool, an MTF. Okay, so these all have related regulations that they must abide by. And I want to show you a concrete example, actually two of them around venues in this talk. One, there's a case study that we did that you can download from the SEC website, the US regulator. And this was something, so the investment bank wealth manager UBS had a fintech competition. And we realized we needed to make a splash and get people to pay attention to formal verification. And so I think it was called the Future of Finance Challenge, and in particular banking efficiency. So they had been fined $14.5 million by the SEC for issues of unfairness in their dark pool. So their dark pool supported something called undisclosed crossing constraints and sub-penny pricing. And sub-penny pricing is a way that you can unfairly jump the queue and get ahead of other people in the order book, trade before them, even though you shouldn't be able to, by adding an economically insignificant increase to the price you're willing to pay for a buy order. So that's against the law. And in the process of their settlement with the SEC, which took roughly 4 years, was very expensive for the government, very expensive for UBS, they actually made public something called Form ATS, which this is one page of it. And this is an example of a regulatory filing that a bank like UBS has to file with the SEC to describe how their dark pool operates. So this, if we actually look at it, and we're going to build a model of it and analyze it. So 28 pages, and it used to be that these were not public. They're becoming more public, and basically what happened as part of this entry into this competition, we took this description. So as you can see, this is describing effectively the logic of their system, but it is an informal spec. And we took this and we built a framework in our verification system, Imandra, to be able to express this succinctly, and built a formal model of it. And our goal was to show how those issues that they were fined for could have been found automatically in advance by analyzing the design. And we did that, which was great. But in the process, Imandra actually kicked back the model and said there's a much more fundamental flaw in the way this dark pool is designed. It turns out, so when you're sorting orders in an order book, you do it by a certain ranking function that says, this order should be ranked higher than this order. And the ranking function that they describe here that they've been using actually wasn't transitive. So, you apply quicksort using this guy, all bets are off. It's not even transitive. It doesn't make sense. So Imandra then synthesized precise market events, precise orders that show this lack of transitivity and how that can be used to jump the queue. And then I think that is why we ended up winning. So this was, I think 620 companies from 52 countries, and we won the whole thing with a counterexample. But that, this has been a great thing for us. That's the CEO of UBS COO, and that.
Brad, you're not wearing a tie. Is that a statement?
Always, yes, that's right. Not today either. Yes. So.
What were the competitors? What kind of technology were they using?
Oh, it was all over the place. There was a biometric watch, I think, that you could use to authenticate to get into your bank account. There were, one involved facial recognition for making payments. There were some blockchain things, I think.
Not everybody was looking at the same problem then.
No, the call effectively, call for entry was banking efficiency was the category. I think there were 4 categories you could enter into, and then there was one final competition for the whole thing. But one that was somewhat related was cryptography. So CryptoSense, which is a very interesting company doing analysis of crypto APIs, Graham Steele, etc. But yeah, it was all over the map. I think there's videos of the pitches and so on online. But yes, so this has helped a lot, and also to get regulators to take notice, because this is pointing out something that had been improved, that if the regulator had just, had a tool that could effectively do a certain kind of counterexample search, they would have found this very quickly. Okay, so I want to just show you a little bit in detail what this looks like. So it's describing order entry and routing. So it's saying what the order types are and their parameters. You have resident orders, immediate or cancel orders, and conditional indications. We don't have to go into what they are, but it turns out conditional indications are the way people can actually game the system here. Source categories for orders are as follows. There's 4 different categories. Conditional indications indicate an intent to trade, specifying a security, a side, which is buy or sell, a price, a quantity, and a minimum executable quantity. A conditional indication will be held until canceled or expired at day's end. Prior to the execution of any potential cross involving 1 or more conditional indications, the dark pool will send a message to the order originator, blah, blah, blah. So this is a spec. It's just in English. And, I mean, it is rather amazingly detailed. So this is crossing restrictions. This was another thing that was involved in the SEC fine. You can say things like no self-cross to prevent crossing against your own orders, orders that come from the same client ID. Certain rounding lots, you can put orders into rounding lots in different strategic ways. This pegged midpoint mode. So one of the regulations that I know a great physicist at, let's just say, a major regulatory agency who believes this regulation, to enforce it, would require changes to the theory of relativity. It's just so. But effectively, what a dark pool does is, by regulation, because you're getting filled in this internal inside of a bank sort of opaque system, it has to be the case that you're not giving your clients a worse price than they would get at a public exchange. And so dark pool prices involve something called pegging. And so what pegging means is you have at any given time a signal coming from different public exchanges of what the prices are for your security. And you have to take that signal of the best current price at a national exchange into account when you determine the price in your dark pool. But it's like floating point rounding modes. You have different ways you can take that into account. You can be pegged to mid, you can be pegged to near, pegged to far, and you can specify where you want to be pegged in your order, but ultimately the way it's used cannot, by law, should not allow you to get a worse price. So it's very complicated. But finally, what I want to show you a concrete example of is order priority. So, an order book is a data type that you can think of it as a pair of lists. If we're just zooming in on one security, like Microsoft shares. So you have a list of buy orders and you have a list of sell orders. And at each discrete time step, both lists are sorted with respect to a ranking function. And that ranking function effectively defines which orders are going to be given priority, because it is ultimately the best eligible buy and the best eligible sell, the top of both books, that are eligible to trade with each other. So when a new order comes in, let's say it has a more aggressive price than you, it's a limit order. Well, a typical thing is what's called price time priority. That's a lexicographic order where if you have a more aggressive price, you're willing to pay more than someone else for Microsoft, you'll be ranked above them. And otherwise, if you have the same price, you'll break the tie, with who was there first. So that's a very common idea people have, but in practice, these things are far more complicated. So this 4.1 is describing in their dark pool how priority works for UBS ATS. It says eligible resident orders and immediate or cancel orders are given priority based first on price, second on the time of their receipt. Eligibility is determined based on the crossing restrictions associated with the orders on both sides of the potential cross, so cross is a potential trade. Invites are sent to the order originators of conditional indications on a priority based first on price, second on the quantity, and third on the time of receipt. For orders with the same price and time, priority is given to resident and IOC over conditional indications. All marketable limit orders, and so now it's referencing what's called the NBO, which is the national best offer, and there's also national best bid. And these are these signals that are coming from the public exchanges to ensure you're not giving clients a worse price than what they could have gotten externally.
You just say roughly what's the frequency of the orders in this dark pool?
So actually, I may have a, let me see if I have a little graphic for this. I have somewhere. Oh, it may be difficult to find, but one second.
Don't you say no?
Yeah, sorry?
Why don't you say no?
Just say no.
Okay, yes, so, I mean, we're dealing with, you know, microsecond frequency on these things, but, oh, I wish I could find this little, okay, maybe afterwards I'll show you, but it's just staggering, you know, utterly, yes, let's say, yes. Okay, so now let's analyze that matching logic in the priority logic for UBS. And we'll do it using our system we've developed called Imandra. So Imandra is very influenced by ACL2. We're Texans and who found ourselves in Europe and here. And what we've done is, you know, we've learned over time sort of different design decisions we need to make from other systems that existed. And fundamentally for us, the most important thing is what we call computing with counterexamples. So it just turns out at this state of financial markets, almost always these systems have subtle flaws. I mean, sometimes not subtle, but almost always they have flaws. And we need to be able to actually construct these rich counterexamples, you know, sequences of market events, which may be very deep. But we've learned that, you know, it's not enough to just be able to construct those. We need to have a unified computational environment where we can actually compute with the counterexamples. And so that's really led to how we designed Imandra. So what Imandra is it is a formalized subset of OCaml, and we're integrated with the OCaml compiler, toolchain, you know, member of the CAML consortium. And what we've done is in this pure total subset of OCaml, we have built a reasoning engine. In a way, very much in the spirit of how ACL2 is a reasoning engine for a subset of Common Lisp. But we've done it for a subset of OCaml, and we've done it in such a way that a number of things are first class in our system. So in particular, as I mentioned, counterexamples are first class. So if you ask Imandra to verify something and it computes a counterexample, that's actually reflected in the runtime, you know, as a valid OCaml object, and you can then compute with it. And all of our models are fully executable. So something that's very important is when we build, let's say, a formal model of a dark pool matching engine, and you then verify properties of it, regulators and financial, you know, institutions, they want to be able to compile that model to a high-performance simulator that can be used as a live monitor, effectively, with the same messaging formats, APIs, as the actual production system, if they're not using it in production. They want to be able to run it side by side to make sure that the actual production system is doing, you know, is behaving effectively in the same way. So it needs to all be executable and efficiently so. As you'll see, I mean, these logics get matching logics get very nonlinear, the price calculations, priority calculations, and so on. And so we've had to build decision procedures that are really tailored to the types of properties that are arising in regulations. And that's led us to introduce something we call principal region decomposition, which is basically a variant of symbolic execution, but it takes nonlinear sign invariance into account. So I'll show you a concrete example. We think of it as a sort of adaptation of cylindrical algebraic decomposition to programs, but it's symbolic execution modulo nonlinear sign invariance, effectively. And we then have a graphical way that regulators and financial institutions can dive into the state spaces of these algorithms and analyze different regions of behavior. Proof automation for various regulations, and then we piggyback off of these first-class region decompositions to do things like test suite generation and actually generate documentation from the formal models, and I'll show you examples. So I want to dive into a model of a dark pool. By the way, what time? Do you know how much time I have?
Well, you started at about 11:40.
Okay.
But we're
Cool.
enjoying this.
Oh, okay. So let's say 10 minutes, so I have to be quicker. Let's just dive in dive into a model, and I just want to show you, for instance, reasoning about UBS. So this is, I want to show you the lowest level reasoning effectively about this model expressed in OCaml, rather than going through our DSL. Okay, is that readable? Cool. Better. Okay, so here, I think I must make it full screen. Okay, so this is, I just want you to see how practical and feasible this is. So what we're doing is we're building here an executable formal model of the priority logic of that dark pool. And we have effectively market data that's coming in at any given time. We have a number of different order types: market limit, pegged, peg conditional indication, limit conditional indication, etc. Orders can have different attributes and categories, different capacity. This is all coming from their regulatory disclosure. And then we have the main type of an order. And so this is just a record. It has an ID. It has a pegging for its pricing. It has a client ID, an order type. It has a quantity, minimum acceptable quantity for a fill, leaves quantity, which is, so basically it starts with a certain quantity and that can get filled over time, and at any given time what's left is the leaves quantity, etc. Can expire. And now what this is, there's a bunch of things to, let me just show you, there's a bunch of sort of standard library functions that are effectively taking, like here, priority price. This is taking an order, and whether you're on the buy or sell side, and taking current market data, and it then takes your pegging into account in that current market data to figure out what the price would be if you were contributing to a trade, and both sides have to agree on a price. But this stuff gets very complicated. And then finally, this is a formalized version of their ranking function. So what this is doing, this is saying, okay, give me a side of the book, either buy or sell side. Let's say it's the buy side. You give me two orders, order 1, order 2, and current market data. And this is going to decide if order 1 should be ranked higher than order 2. So this is a formalized version of that priority logic. And let's just ask, is this thing even transitive? So I'm just going to load transitivity. Yes. And while that's going, so this is how you'll typically see an order book displayed. This is aggregating effectively this data across, here we're seeing this maybe aggregated across different venues and so on. But ultimately, what's really going on is under the hood, for each security, you have an order book like this. You have just a list of buys and a list of sells. At each discrete time step, it's sorted and how. So if we now, let's go look, what we've done is we have asked Imandra in this case, is it always the case if order 1 is ranked higher than order 2 with respect to some side in market data, order 2 is ranked higher than order 3 with respect to the same side in market data, is it always the case that order 1 is ranked higher than order 3? Those, fundamental, simple question, is the ranking criteria transitive? And it turns out for UBS it's not. And so this is an example, of a very small counterexample, but what people, and we tend to find so useful about having first-class counterexamples in Imandra is, so by default our counterexamples are bound to a module called CX. So I now have, cx.order1 is a valid OCaml object, cx.order2, etc. So I can just compute with these things, order higher ranked, cx.side, cx.order1, cx.order2, cx.market, order higher ranked, cx.side, cx.order2, cx.order3, market, and what makes everything then get very bad. Oops. Okay, so this thing's not even transitive, and that was one of the key findings with this dark pool, which is, was very quickly fixed. But this is the kind of thing that gets regulators and banks to take notice, something very concrete, and then we can show directly how you can use this to jump the queue.
What's your definition of transitivity?
Oh, in this case, it's just transitivity of this. You can think of it as a greater than function, order higher ranked. So, you know, the normal.
That depends on the order of the orders and in which.
So you mean the sequence of orders, you know, the order that different orders are matched is dependent on this ranking function, and which is called order higher ranked. And that ranking function better at least be transitive. Does that make sense?
Almost.
We maybe take it offline. Maybe there's a lot of uses of the word order here, so it's confusing. Yes.
Can you give a quick intuition for what was going on in those three cases?
Yes. So actually, in the SEC filing, we have something we proposed to the SEC that came out of this. We call the precise specification standard, which is on exactly this, using formal verification and requiring precise disclosures for core infrastructure, things like this. And we then go and diagnose why this happened. And it's effectively, it's just a subtle corner case around these things called conditional indications. And you can basically promise that you're going to do something, and if you don't do it, you can take pegging into account to jump the queue. So if we look at what the actual like cx.order1, this is a limit conditional indication pegged to mid with midpoint mode 4. cx.order2, this is a limit conditional indication pegged to near with midpoint mode 10. And cx.order3, this is a market order pegged to near with midpoint mode 18. And basically all those, that's a bad case. So it is something we call Imandra modeling language, but basically it's a subset of OCaml for which we've built a reasoning engine. And then, okay, I realize I'm running out of time, so I just want to show you, first of all, what is this? Oh, okay.
We're loving it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, yeah. So we have market orders, limit orders. We're starting to see there's a few more. I mean, what does this landscape actually look like? You cannot make this stuff up. So this is, a real headline. Simplicity is the goal of NASDAQ's new order type. CEO says NASDAQ plans to offer a new order type aimed at long-term investors, etc. Oh, yeah. What is it? Hide not slide orders. We're slippery and hidden. And I mean, unbelievable. New order types are being introduced all the time. Again, this is part of incentivization to get people to trade on your platform. And the discrete complexity is just something that must be analyzed. Yes, SEC fines exchange over queue jumping orders. The list goes on. Okay, so these are key questions that we ask about a venue design. Is your venue fair? Can you prove it? And what we've had to do is formalize various aspects of these regulations. So just to show you, here's a redacted excerpt from one of our early contracts with an investment bank, but this was done in the context of MiFID II, preparing for new European regulations. And these are the types of things, effectively, that we have developed formalizations for. These are derived from regulations. So, isolation of client information on effects of pricing and fills. So you need to always be able to completely specify how who someone is plays into pricing, and it better not allow someone to be disadvantaged. Sub-penny pricing, that only prices at legally allowed increments are accepted because otherwise people could jump the queue. You need to be able to isolate all factors affecting how orders are prioritized. Limit prices must behave correctly. Sliding and rounding, all with respect to this pegging infrastructure, for instance. So this, I believe it's 15 statements in English, and this turned into 114 formalized verification goals, effectively, that we now have as a library, a MiFID II library that you can take and subject your venue design to, whenever you're using Imandra. Okay. So that's what we call Imandra venues, and some exciting things happening there in the regulatory space. So I showed you transitivity of order ranking. So I want to show you now, if I can do this in just a few minutes, I want to show you an exchange. So that was a dark pool, and now how do exchanges do it? Well, exchanges are a bit more transparent. And so here is a typical trading manual for an exchange. So here's one for the SIX Swiss exchange. And if you're a trader, for instance, you have to study this and actually take an exam to get licensed to trade on this thing. And it's 206 pages. But this better be correct, because people are building their algorithms based on this. And if it says something that's incorrect, that's a major issue. So, I mean, it's unbelievable how complex this stuff is. And, okay, so we have a bunch of tables, but I want to show you actually getting into the matching logic. Yeah, so here we have effectively some aspects of connectivity, and then different classes of, let's say, securities are treated differently. And then finally, you have a number of concrete examples. And this is trying to teach you the matching logic, through a couple sort of darts that have been strategically thrown in the dark, let's say. And so what does a typical example here look like? This says, okay, example 3. The limits remaining on the order book determine the price for execution of market orders of the same volume if the reference price is strictly less than the remaining buy limit, then the price is going to be equal to the remaining buy limit. And then you have a concrete example. Your reference price is 45 francs. Your order book looks exactly like this. You have a new order coming in, and since the reference price is lower than the remaining buy limit, the buy limit determines the price. The price is 46 francs. Okay, and what happens is, this documentation, first of all, just by its very nature, it may be wrong. It has no connection to the production system by default. And as the production system changes, of course, something that was previously correct may be stale, may be incorrect, and there's no actual formal governance around this process. So that was something we needed to address, and that led to us doing this thing we call principal region decompositions, which I want to show you. 6.ml. So here is a model, again, lowest level in our subset of OCaml, executable formal model of the SIX Swiss exchange. And this is for equities. We just have 3 order types, but you'll see they're very wide in their parameter settings. And here's the data associated with an order. It has an ID, a type, a quantity. You can have something called iceberg orders with hidden liquidity. Anyways, we model things very much in the Boyer-Moore style of machine operational semantics, where we have a state data type, and then effectively the state, you can think of it as representing all memory, all data available in the system at any given time, including a queue of unprocessed messages, a flag that says whether or not its stop trading button has been pressed, its current order book, etc. And then we have a function step that is going to, basically step the state machine, and then we want to reason about that. And so our automation basically is, typically we're proving an inductive property about step, and then lifting that ultimately by induction to a top-level run function, which is doing, iterating, stepping through the states. But I want to show you one key function, which is match price. So this function, this is effectively what that bit of documentation was showing in the document. And this takes a state of the exchange with its current order book, current market data, etc., and it peels off the best buy and the best sell order and says, assuming a trade is allowed between them, how should we price it? And as you can see, it's quite easy if you're matching 2 limit orders together. The price of the match is going to be the older price of the 2. Likewise, 2 quotes is easy. But if you match 2 market orders, things get very complicated. The system transitions into a mode called volatility auction, and it starts recursively building up a queue of trades where it knows the quantity of the trades, but it doesn't know the price of the trades. And that price will only be found and then applied to all of the pending fills when you reach a limit order on either side of the book, because you're then traversing the book. And depending on how that's done, on sort of what's left over, if there's residual quantity, you may have to take the reference price into account. Okay, so very convoluted. How do you possibly analyze this stuff? And what we were faced with was the need, first of all, to be able to analyze it for safety and fairness properties, but then to give practitioners, especially regulators and compliance officers and designers, a way to go and dive into the state space and understand what's going on. And Okay, so now in Imandra we have this notion of a region decomposition. So I can say decompose match price. And what it's doing, it's now going and effectively through symbolic execution, but taking into account sign invariance of nonlinear behavior of pricing functions and so on, it's computing for me a decomposition of the state space into finitely many symbolically described regions, such that in each region we have a list of constraints on the state, and we have an invariant, which is a symbolic output of that pricing function. And what we've designed this to do is match effectively the kinds of things, there's many choices to be made when doing a decomposition like this, and it's subject to something we call a basis of disabled functions, whose basically we have exported lemmas about them, but we're not opening up their definition through symbolic execution. And we designed it in such a way to match the kinds of things that they're documenting here. And so, here's just an example, region 4.20.11, and this says, okay, here's a principle of trading. Whenever the top buy order's quantity is equal to the top sell order's quantity, and the second best buy order is not a market order, and there's only one eligible sell order, and the second best buy order's price is less than or equal to the reference price, and the top two orders are both markets, then always the price of a match is going to be the reference price. So that's very much a kind of thing that would be documented here, but derived directly from the executable formal spec. And then, now that that's done, we can, let's see. So by the way, we used to deliver this stuff on premise, and that was just a nightmare. And pushing it to the cloud with collaborative ecosystem in a marketplace where people can share all of their formal specs and analyze their connections, that's a lot of what we've also been building. Let me do Wizard. Okay, so effectively, let me show you this. So now we have, difficult to see, but we have this graphical way that you can then go and explore this decomposition of the state space. And you can then, for instance, you can write custom printers. We have custom printers that print these regions out in English, and then we have test suite generation that will go and solve the constraints to give you test suites based on this. So here are some simple regions. This says, look, if one side of the book, the buy side's empty, of course, there's no price. An unknown, by the way, is an actual constructor of the price data type that's used to transition into auction. Likewise, on the other side, that's when they're both empty, but things get interesting all of a sudden when we have possible matches on both sides. So let's take a look at region 4.22. So this says whenever the top buy order's quantity is not equal to the top sell order's quantity, and they're both markets, and you have subsequent orders on both sides, then the price of a match is going to be unknown, and that's a trigger that causes the system to go into auction, effectively. Or if we go here, let's find one that, yeah. So here's one that's interesting. So, if the top buy order's quantity is equal to the top sell order's quantity, and let's look at constraint 3, the top sell order's time is strictly less than the top buy order's time, blah, 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 and we have a market in a quote, then always the price of a match is going to be the price of the top buy order. So now, you can go and drill down into this behavior, derived symbolically from the spec. You can actually export documentation that is driven from the spec. And then, for instance, we can do, let's do test cases per region 5. And we can now do test gen on match price, let's say. And this is now taking that decomposition, and in each region, it's solving the constraints for up to 5 unique test cases. And because these are all reflected OCaml objects, you can then write custom printers that print this out, as fixed messages or in whatever your test format is. And now you have, a rigorous, the beginning, let's say, of a rigorous method for actually generating high coverage test suites and knowing what you're testing and having governance around that. And there's so many ways that you can effectively tweak the strategy of decomposition and what's going on. So, okay. I think I need to skip analyzing fairness property. Something else that we do that I sort of have glossed over in that stack is in between all of those different layers of financial algorithms, there are effectively connectivity protocols, ways that those systems communicate with each other. And they communicate typically using, at least in trading, they typically use a protocol called FIX, Financial Information Exchange. And FIX specs themselves are rather incredibly verbose as well. Or maybe, here. A FIX spec for New York Stock Exchange is 74 pages. And, again, you have tons of tables and prose. And something that we've developed is a domain-specific language built on top of Imandra using something called Xtext for formally describing FIX specs. And you get out of it an executable formal Imandra model. And then you can use something called an architect. And basically, let me show you. So in this marketplace in Imandra Markets, you then have different institutions with their models. And then you can go and, if you want to spec out the connectivities of your system and you want to connect a venue to an algo trading engine, you can graphically effectively spec out the connection between your system and the New York Stock Exchange model and analyze their connectivity and do this in the cloud and get out test suites and compliance reports and so on. So we're trying to put a lot of work into making this stuff easy for people to adopt and just get formal specs and model-based testing and verified designs, et cetera, all into the workflow, because not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it saves people time and money and pain. Okay, so I think I should keep going. But yes, the last thing. So everything I've spoken to you about is basically at the bottom of the stack, and that's where we are. And there's so much work to be done there, but we need to get up. We need to keep going. We need to be able to, properly reason about a complex market-making algorithm and trading strategy. And we actually started our initial contracts. We're doing that, but we realized, it's like things like the Clink stack and incredible work that's happening with things like CakeML and so on. We realized we can't properly reason about these high-level trading algorithms unless we have actual formal models of the venues they're trading on, because it's those venues that are ultimately executing their intentions. And so that's why we decided we had to build from the ground up. But we're very much determined to continue and to defeat something that is just a real plague, let's say, in making markets actually analyzable. And that is something I mentioned at the beginning, that typical financial mathematics and formal or financial economic models will totally abstract away this discrete structure of all the venues and their matching logics. And we need to develop new mathematics that runs the gamut of what we call financial mathematics, martingales, Wiener processes, et cetera, stochastic calculus. But we need to do that in such a way that it can be rooted in the actual discrete mechanics. Okay, so in summary, hopefully I have convinced you there's a pressing need for venues to be bulletproof with respect to safety and fairness regulations, for matching logics at the core plumbing of the critical infrastructure of our markets to be formally described to regulators and market participants, for those logics to be analyzed using tools that we all develop, and for new financial mathematics to be developed that takes the precise discrete behavior of this low-level plumbing into account. And this really is a killer app for formal methods, and hopefully more of you will get involved. Well, thank you.
Something you hinted at very early on, and I think the last talk was, the last few slides were starting to kind of formalize it. You're talking about the incentives, and when you're designing one of these things, you have to hope people will use it, right? And
yes.
Design in such a way that your friends can use it and you get kickbacks. It's a great incentive for everyone, but that's not the point. The point I guess I was getting at was as you have developed this issue of a state space, and you have you can click around as we saw on the grid and see things. It seems to me that you're almost just one logical step away, which could be a big step, between analyzing the designs of these markets and checking them, for example, for consistency with some basic logical things. One sort of logical step to designing them yourself and finding ones that have properties that you specify, which in that
Yes.
in that regard would require kind of yet another kind of spec, which is at the high level. I don't know, at the interface, the boundary of this market. So why are people going to use it, and what are its long-term properties as they use it that way, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know, is that seemingly where you're going with this next step, or is that off
Yeah,
the beaten track a bit?
great question. So I mean, I think that's very interesting, and we are, we're a team now of 10 people full-time and 14, oh yeah, so thanks to our incredible team. Oh, someone's missing. Oh yeah, for some reason. But 14 total if you count. Well, now 15 total. Incredible new intern. But we have to be strategic effectively in what we're doing, and right now let's just say we're very busy. But what we've done is built partnerships with our formal fix specs. We're now working with the standards body to actually get and we've open sourced our DSL for describing fix specs and our formal model of the fix protocol. And so we're working on getting that into standards. And in the process now, we're working effectively with one of the major fix providers to help them develop formally verified fix infrastructure that they then sell to others. So it's a sort of Intel Inside model in a way. So I don't see us getting in the business of selling, a verified fix, but we want to be the calculator that helps people do that, and then the community that helps people use it effectively.
Wouldn't it be more lucrative to find these bugs and then sell them?
So, I mean, it's a great question.
Regulating agency.
Yes. So, I mean, it's something we think about and worry about a lot is, for instance, that flaw that we went through in UBS, that's something that can be used to game the system. And so, it's a difficult thing because I think this is natural progression of many black hat, let's say, uses are going to be possible of finding exploits while these systems remain so improperly designed. And so hopefully that potential is a real catalyst that motivates people to actually want to make their systems bulletproof because, and in a way what we have to strategically do is set up a sort of arms race between financial institutions and regulators because both sides doesn't want the other one knowing more about their algorithms than they do. And so I totally agree. It's something we think about a lot, but that's why we want all of this stuff to be as open as possible and have the encodings of these directives be open, provide APIs to allow people to use this stuff in the cloud easily. But I think it's a difficult question, or at least a difficult problem to solve.
So, when things go wrong and the parties to what went wrong end up in court, are the judges are they prepared to base their judgments on the formalised evidence that you might in future provide them rather than, as it were, the PDFs?
It's a great question. So there's no precedent for it that I know of.
Hasn't happened yet.
Hasn't happened yet. Yeah. So I don't know. It's something that I expect will happen, and then will happen quite a lot once it does, and some things are happening in that direction. I think one thing we could do is look towards related things in other safety critical industries and around negligence, for instance. That's a lot of what we have done with regulators is actually looked at things like DO 178C and looked at formal methods supplement, common criteria, et cetera, these other things where formal methods are used in safety critical industries, and we've tried to adapt them to show regulators, look, if the FAA has something like this, then you can have standards like this and develop a path for that. Where it lands in court, yeah, it's a great question. But I think this is certainly the direction we want these types of investigations to take, because otherwise, for instance, these dark pool investigations, but without formal models, these are almost always done after the fact, years after the fact, using big data, whatever that means, searching through and looking for post-trade.
We see that at the moment.
Exactly. So getting to the point that we can actually analyze the specs and have something precise upon which we can all discuss who's at fault for what. I think is crucial, and that's what we're pushing for. And we're lucky that the SEC is very forward-thinking in this. So is the CFTC in the U.S. and FCA is moving in that direction. So is ESMA. So I think we will get there.
So the message is big proof over big data.
The big proof over big data. That's right.
So Michel and then Cesare and then.
I have the last two questions. They are answered. Thank you.
Oh,
okay.
Could you say a few words about your business model as a company?
Sure. I mean,
Great question.
I'm trying to knock it out of the park, let's say. I mean, what any questions specifically on?
How are you making money?
So, we sell tools to people to be able to formalize these things and to be able to analyze the actual formal tools.
This product you're actually selling?
We're actually selling. Yeah, we're actually selling. And, with interfaces designed for compliance officers, interfaces designed for, somebody at DIRA at the SEC whose, goal or mission is to go through one of these dark pool specs and analyze it. The actual people who are writing the connectivity code need to be able to query the model. So for instance, one of the things you can do this decomposition with side conditions. So I could say, for instance, let my side condition x equal match price of x is not equal to unknown, for instance. And now I could say decompose my match price assuming my side condition. And so now we're only going to get regions of behavior where the price is not that trigger that goes into auction. And so the nice thing about this is you can now query the model. And so that's a typical thing that people in connectivity and QA want to do where, for instance, they want to take a formal model now of, let's say, NASDAQ, but only show, or maybe I'll show you this one. So here's what, the full model may be something gigantic and, but maybe they're only interested in, let's say, the actual sequences of events that cause the mode to change. And then we get out these specific regions, and then they can generate tests for those, and you can print those out in a more readable format and use it to build certified documentation. So it's basically we're building a lot of interfaces and tools that we learned early on. We can never expect a user in finance to know what a limit is or a rewrite rule or anything like that. So it has to be automatic for whatever we can do, and then just build good interfaces powered by what we all do effectively.
But banks have money to spend on. I mean, in terms of their budget.
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, you might, yeah. Would you rather spend X on this or get a $20 million fine?
Have you started to analyze multiple trading venues simultaneously, taking into account time delays and things like that?
We have. So interaction of them, and that is stuff that we have to do, for instance, when we look at best execution properties of smart order routers. And that then connects more to, sometimes, to hybrid systems like things that, maybe it was Paul who asked. Oh no, someone.
One last question.
When translating from natural language restrictions to your formal restrictions, do you run into lots of problems, like different ways of interpreting what is written?
All the time, exactly. So that if you go to the SEC website and if you get this thing, precise specification standard that we propose, it's pretty short, but it's effectively all about that. And clearly, these types of ambiguous documents, I mean, we have so many examples of where these things are just wrong or inconsistent or, clearly do not give you enough information to derive, the description that you need to know how something will work. And people recognize that, and they just, I think they have known it all along, they just didn't know there was a better way. That answers your question.
Let's thank Grant.
Right. Thank you. We'll start again after lunch at the usual time.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And I just love the video.
Thank you.
Look on that.
That 5 months. There's actually there's a cool motion graphics magazine called.
Grant is also an artist.